everybody should be pressing overhead. And I say that as a blanket statement. Even if you have some type of limitation or even pathology, it's likely that you can. We just have to find the right movement, the right range, and the right dosage for you in order to build the muscle and strength through there. But what we end up seeing it broken out to is going back to the beginning, is a lot of these more isolated movements like lateral raises with dumbbells or cables or tubing. And we're putting a lot of volume into our workouts, which, you can build hypertrophy there, but the strength is going to be limited. So think about that. Like, do I just want bigger caps on my shoulders, or do I want more shoulder strength? And it's not that if you build muscle, you're building strength. That's not my point. Like, hear me out here. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're building strength is and can be different than building hypertrophy in terms of how you're applying your programming. So it should look and feel very much like you're building strength in your lower extremity or in your bench press or in your seated row or in your deadlift or anything else. It's the same. So again, don't break it out into all these things. And people treat it like they treat their biceps. Like they got 4 different movements that they're doing for their shoulders, like they're doing for their biceps. Like, why do you need 4 movements, 3 sets each? It's like 12 total sets. What are you doing here? Like the shoulders do a lot of things. But remember, going back to what we were talking about before, think about this, and that is every time you're pulling or pushing, you're using your shoulders. So how am I applying those same principles, up top when I'm going overhead? Okay, so we talked about sort of the basic ones. If I have a limitation with regard to maybe those exercises aren't working for me, I have maybe an injury, I've got an irritation, I've got some type of mechanical issue that's stopping me from doing those, or they're just uncomfortable. I don't feel comfortable. Those are 2 different things. Like, I'm not comfortable, like I feel pain, versus I'm not comfortable because I've had injuries in the past and I'm scared I'm going to hurt myself. What are some other ones that you guys like?
I think if most people haven't played with is going to a landmine. That's a super accessible way to get overhead, and we've talked about that on our shoulders episode, where you can change your body position. You can be standing or kneeling, and it does change how much it's overhead and all that kind of stuff. But we've talked a lot about shoulder mechanics, and I think the thing that is great about a landmine is it teaches shoulder mechanics. So it's not only that you're getting overhead, but because you're pressing vertically, but then you're also pressing into the implement. We've talked a little bit about needing to get some serratus anterior engagement, and the shoulder blade needs to come into upward rotation as you press up overhead. It teaches that, and it strengthens that while you're also working your normal musculature for pressing overhead, like your delts, things like that. So if you are someone that has shoulder issues, or you're newer, or you just never tried it, like, play with the landmine. That's a big one that a lot of people don't do.
Yeah, so to be clear, there's a few different ways to apply the landmine. I don't know if that's where you were about to go.
Yeah, no, I remember, you talked about that in the past, and then you also talked about the Viking press too.
So
which is basically like a bilateral landmine.
Yeah, so exactly. So application would be if you have the landmine would be that tube that sticks in, maybe it's attached to a rack, it's on a swivel or attaches to a plate on the floor. It's got a sleeve on it. You slide that barbell down into it, and it's got lots of motion in it, right? You can do all kinds of things with the landmine. I really like landmine for a lot of reasons. I also think it gets a little overplayed sometimes, but it's a really valuable piece of equipment. And so what I also like about the landmine is how you can create stability below that, going back to teaching somebody how to do the movement properly and learning the mechanics, so that you can then go apply those in other places, again, with the dumbbells, with the barbell, whatever else, as you start to progress. But you could start with somebody standing, getting their whole body involved with it, so that landmine is now basically connected to the floor, if you will. The barbell's coming out towards you. You grab the other end of that barbell, and you can press overhead. It allows you a lot of freedom and flexibility to put it in the place that your body feels comfortable going, or has the ability to complete. So you can do it with a single arm. However, there's all kinds of things you could do with it. You could do it from a kneeling position, from a half kneeling position. So if you're having a little bit of trouble keeping that stability, or you really want to load it up and really, really isolate or focus on that area, you could drop to 1 knee, you could drop to 2 knees, right? And so now we're taking everything from the knees down out of it. So you can create that stability from the knees up rather than from the feet up, which is a different feel. And you might recognize, like, oh, my range of motion seems to be limited. That's probably because you picked it up somewhere else down the chain.
Yeah.
take the knees and the ankles out of it, and you might find that you don't have as much range because you've compensated from the ankles, the knees, and the hips, maybe low back, thoracic, to be able to get that a little bit more directly overhead. But if you take those things out of the bottom, you might recognize that, oh, I don't really have that range. I am a little bit more limited here.
For sure.
So that's like the single arm stuff, but you mentioned like the landmine, which I really like too. It's an awesome piece of equipment. Basically, it's that attachment.
Or the Viking.
Sorry. Yeah, the Viking attachment that goes right over, slides right over that end of that barbell. And then you've got handles on either side to where now you can do it bilaterally. You can change your widths on there in your grip, and you can load it more, right? Because you can get more weight on that bar. So landmine, Viking press attachments are great ways to overload in maybe a more stable or safe position to get the max benefit out of the work that you're putting in. I love that one too. What else you guys like?
I really like a bent over row and working on the eccentric component, especially when, we're pronated, our palms are facing down. To really hit posterior shoulders, because you're also hitting your back at the same time. So depending on, the load that you're utilizing and the implement that you're using, you can really hit that posterior shoulder well. Yeah,
I love that one. It's probably one that gets left off the list in terms of a shoulder exercise.
Yeah. People wouldn't think of that.
Yeah, they think rear delts, then they have to go to the pec tech machine and sit backwards in it and do your rear delt exercise. I mean, that's rear delts, right? It's the same. It's the same motion. It's the same mechanics that you'd be doing in the bent over row or barbell row. I talked about my favorite back machine in the gym, and that's that seated plate loaded pull where the chest pad is in front of you and the handles are out in front, and it has the different hand positions. Again, go back a few episodes to how to build a bigger back. We were talking about this, and I specifically mentioned this. You're going to build bigger shoulders and bigger rear delts as you start to get a little wider. You take a little bit more of the lat out of it. You recruit a little bit more of the rear delts to get that bar or that machine or that bar going the direction you want it to. Another great one and that one's super safe, right? Because it's kind of hard to mess that one up. Yet you can really overload and really focus with that machine by taking out. The difference being the bent over row, same movement pattern. We're just in an upright position, stabilized by the machine, versus being bent over, obviously, with the barbell, and that having the rest of the chain having to work quite a bit differently and quite a bit harder to maintain the same stability. Go back to the diving board analogy to really produce that force at the end, which starts at your hands, right, which is attached to the bar and then comes all the way back. But that's a great one. I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, there's that. But then also going back to the landmine, doing a single arm bent over pronated row, palms facing down.
I love that. Yeah.
Or whether you're using a dumbbell, you can still use that bent over rowing mechanic with those other modalities.
Great progression or regression, depending on where you are in your journey here. And that one again, highly adjustable, right? So if like the barbell is just not feeling right, or you have some asymmetries, or you have some issues on one side versus the other, you can still overload. And there's the other thing I like about that is it's much easier to work through some of your power movements on that landmine, implement the components of power with the landmine versus like a machine that's fixed. And, maybe it's not as kind if you're dropping it and you're just trying to work that concentric or that concentric movement right from the beginning, that power production right from the dead stop. But that's what I also like about what you said about that bent over row. It still translates over to the other things we talked about. That's the eccentric portion, that lowering portion, which is where we build that hypertrophy, we build that strength. It's in that eccentric motion. That's where the work gets done. That's where the most of the work is done and the growth happens. Going back to my guy, Jeff Nichols, and what he had programmed into this selection program for people that obviously have to push overhead a lot, if you're pushing logs and shit that they do in selection processes, but also the swimming, is how he programmed in tempo and power work throughout the week using some different things, which is really cool. But I like that movement. Both those movements a ton. And the fact that you're hitting, like you're thinking rowing or pulling versus overhead pressing to build a stronger overhead press. Also a good one.